Number one would be the decriminalization of all drugs in Oregon. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so this last election, we had two different ballot initiatives that were created by the citizens, right? But I think maybe not every state has a ballot initiative process, but here in Oregon we do. So basically you've got to create your ballot initiative, and then you have to go out and get enough signatures, which then gets that on the ballot. And if you don't get enough signatures, then it doesn't even make it to the ballot. But with coronavirus this past year, there weren't really a lot of initiatives that people were working on. But one of them became Proposition 109, and that's for the Psilocybin Services Initiative. Tom and Cherie Eckert, this couple here in Oregon, when they originally envisioned the Psilocybin Services Initiative, they had also included within that the idea of decriminalizing psilocybin mushrooms at the same time. As they were developing that, they found that became kind of a sticking point against it for some people. Now, for some people, they thought that was the best part of the initiative, just decriminalizing psilocybin mushrooms. But they wanted to do something which would actually create a legal program for the therapeutic use of psilocybin. So they said, well, we just need to leave the decriminalization part off. And then they ended up working with another group that created this initiative, which is Prop 110, which was to decriminalize small amounts of virtually all drugs here in Oregon. And this was a statewide initiative, which is a little bit different than a lot of areas are having local municipalities decriminalize, and it's through the decriminalized nature movement, which I personally think is both great and also misguided at the same time. So this first happened, I think it was in Denver, Colorado, that the decriminalized nature folks got psilocybin mushrooms decriminalized in Denver. And then it was in Oakland, California, and Berkeley, California, and then it's also happened now in Vancouver. But that has been people petitioning city governments to decriminalize what they're calling natural medicines, which only includes psychedelics that specifically come from nature, such as mushrooms, ayahuasca, ibogaine, or iboga, peyote, things like that. And they're leaving off any kind of synthetic molecules, even if it's like, let's say, synthetic psilocybin. That's not covered by the decriminalized nature movement. So they want to make a hard and fast distinction between what they say is a natural medicine versus what is a synthetic or man-made medicine, which I think is just a completely false dichotomy myself. But anyway, here in Oregon, rather than go by the city-by-city approach, this group went ahead and organized Prop 110 to cover all of Oregon. And so now, here in Oregon, not only are we going to be developing the legal psilocybin therapy program, but also small amounts of all drugs have been decriminalized. So what that means at the practical level, it's not legal. So you can't buy and sell drugs on a legal market in Oregon. But what it does affect is, let's say you get pulled over and the cops search your car and you have a gram of MDMA in your car, or you have a gram of DMT or something like that in your car. Rather than prosecute you for possession of drugs, the cops can just give you a $100 fine, and it doesn't go on your permanent record. You're not listed as a felon. You don't have to go through the criminal justice system. So it relieves a huge burden of policing, right? Rather busting people for small amounts of drugs, which we all know is traditionally has always been targeted more at minority communities than any other communities. So it's been used as a tool by the police state to repress minorities. And also what it's doing is taking funds within the state of Oregon that would have been directed to prosecuting people and putting them in jail. And now it's taking that money and investing it in healthcare programs So if someone gets busted who is a drug addict, that then they can get counseling and get health care rather than go to prison.
Yeah.
So it's pretty revolutionary in that sense.
Mm-hmm. I think so. That's exciting.
Yeah, it is exciting because the arguments that were made with both of these propositions, 109 and 110, is that Oregon, the state of Oregon itself, has one of the worst healthcare systems in the United States, that we are consistently ranked towards the bottom of all 50 states in terms of access to healthcare. And also, we're very highly ranked with mental and mood and depressive disorders. So we have a high level of highly stressed people in the state. We definitely do have high levels of drug addiction. You know, these people who are self-medicating due to depression or anxiety or trauma or whatever it may be, that they've been funneled into the criminal justice system. They haven't been funneled into the healthcare system. And we have a real lack of access to good healthcare and good medicine here in Oregon. I'm not quite sure what the reason for that is, like why it developed so poorly here. You know, it's just the case. We don't have a robust healthcare system here. And so both of these laws are looking at changing that. So they were voted in with the most recent election in November 2020. The decriminalization law just went into effect like last week or the week before, something like that. And then with the Oregon Psilocybin Services Initiative, that is now supposed to be in a 2-year development program where they're building an advisory board to then develop what are going to be the parameters of the psilocybin assisted therapy program. So you can't go get legal psilocybin therapy yet in Oregon. That's still 2 years out from this point on.
But it's a big step, though, for consciousness.
Yeah, it really is. And I've actually applied to be on the board, the Oregon Psilocybin Advisory Board.
Oh, really? Awesome.
Yeah, and that application was due January 1st, so I keep waiting to, like, when are they going to either tell me yes or no? I don't know what the timeline is that they're looking to actually put this board together is, but that's something that I'm very interested in being a part of. I definitely support it. Yeah, I'd be very interested in having a hand in helping to shape and develop that program.
Yeah. Yeah, I think psilocybin is very important for everyone, just in microdosing, just that alone. But I mean, it can do many things, right? The mushroom. But just microdosing would be very beneficial for people, I think.
Yeah, that certainly some people report that it definitely helps with their depression and anxiety and other disorders. You know, it's important, I think, to recognize when we're talking about psilocybin therapy that a lot of the research that's been done in terms of medical applications has actually been with more macro doses. A large part of the healing potential of psilocybin comes from experiences where you're reaching more into the mystical side of the psychedelic experience. And that's where it provides more profound relief and a sense of reset for people, which is something that you can't get from just microdosing. And, you know, a lot of the stuff that on microdosing, again, it hasn't really been studied scientifically or medically. And there are a lot of anecdotal reports that people say that it really helps them. But then, you know, there are other researchers in the psychedelic field that say that microdosing doesn't actually do anything for people. So there's some disagreement there. But it's an area ultimately where more research is needed, I think.
For sure.
Yeah, it's exciting to live in a state where this is possible. And, you know, I always like to point out that also Oregon is the only state that I know of in the United States. It might be different now in some places, but at least for a long time, Oregon was the only place where anyone could legally join the Native American church and consume and grow and transfer peyote. Whereas most places in the United States, you have to be a registered member of a federally recognized Native American tribe to even participate in a Native American church ceremony legally. Now, people do anyway, but there's the potential that you could go into a Native American church ceremony and you could be arrested by federal officers for violating federal drug laws or even local police could arrest people if you're not a registered member of a Native American tribe. But Oregon, this was at least 2 decades ago that Oregon made sure to legalize access to peyote for anyone in the state, that it's not a racially based program. And it's also here in Oregon is one of the few places where people can legally consume ayahuasca. But even there, it's a little bit ironic that you can only legally consume ayahuasca at the Santo Daime church, but you can't just go drink ayahuasca. You can't go to a shamanistic ayahuasca ceremony, but you can go to a church ceremony and drink ayahuasca that way if you want to. Yeah. So here in Ashland, we've got it all. We've got the Santo Daime Church. Native American Church is fairly active in the area, not necessarily right here in Ashland, but outside in local communities. And I'm sure that there will be psilocybin therapy clinics opening up here in Ashland. And I think we're starting to see some ketamine clinics. People are looking at opening up ketamine clinics in Oregon as well.
That's a good one, I think, for therapy for sure.
I really enjoyed, this was around for a while, and it's my understanding it's just about impossible to get these days, is a form of methoxylated ketamine that went by the street name of Merlin. That was really quite an interesting compound. Had a lot of really fascinating experiences with that, and also mixing that with other psychedelics I found to just be really, really quite novel and really fascinating. It's a very different kind of compound, and it's not like ketamine. I've had ketamine, but the methoxylated ketamine, which was MXE, those are its letters, it was a lot more fun. It was a lot more interesting. Just a very, very curious compound. Not that we necessarily need to base things off of fun, but for me, it was quite the trip. I really enjoyed having MXE around, but it's impossible to get these days.
I was looking at this chart. So you can have less than 1 gram of heroin, less than 1 gram or less than 5 pills of MDMA, less than 2 grams of methamphetamine, less than 40 units of LSD, less than 12 grams of psilocybin, less than 40 units of methadone, less than 40 pills of oxycodone, if you really need that, Jesus. Kratom works, right? But I understand, but less than 2 grams of cocaine, that's all you need, really. The measure also means people caught with the following amounts of drugs will be charged with simple possession, a misdemeanor offense, rather than a felony. 1 to 3 grams of heroin, 1 to 4 grams of MDMA, 2 to 8 grams of methamphetamine, 2 to 8 grams of cocaine.
Yeah, I think that just about covers it. That there's more drugs out there than just that. I think those are some of the most common ones here in Oregon. And, like a lot of places in the United States, there's, the biggest drug problems would be around methamphetamines and the various opioid drugs. That's where we have the biggest problems in the state. And we have a very, very robust cannabis and hemp industry here, which is quite beautiful. Like here in Ashland, you can go out and there are just fields of cannabis. I mean, it's like the kind of thing that I dreamed of as a teenager when I first got into like the legalization movement of thinking of like just fields of giant buds. And around here, I mean, you can get these bushes that are like 15 feet in diameter and like 20 feet tall, and these huge buds, like, just massive. And there can just be fields and fields and fields of it. And for the people who live next to it, sometimes they're not always happy because, it can get kind of stinky. It smells like you got a really strong skunk in the neighborhood. But for me, it's nice to see. And that it used to be everything had to be fenced off, but now it can actually be out in the open. So you don't have to like hide it. But you used to have to hide it for whatever reason. I don't know.
Hopefully everybody can be responsible, and that's what you talk about a lot in your book, Being Human, is that level of responsibility that humans have to take now, for themselves. And this is a good gateway to that, because it does something psychologically when you think of these things as being not forbidden anymore. You're like, okay, well, let me regulate myself and let me choose for myself. You don't have to go balls deep in everything. Little amounts of things are nice too, you know what I mean? You can get blasted or you can have a balance. So, I mean, I think that this is great for Oregon to lead that. It's a revolution of thought, really.
The war on drugs itself has just it's been an absolute disaster. It has helped police departments and it has helped politicians, but the war on drugs has not helped citizens at any level. And it has promoted the militarization of the police across the United States. I mean, that's the number one reason that police departments get heavy military equipment, they say, is to help fight the war on drugs. And so it's really put the police on steroids across the country. It has been used way, way disproportionately against minority communities, and it's prevented people from actually getting the health care that they need if they are a drug addict. And then for people who aren't drug addicts, but are choosing to use these things responsibly for themselves, what business is it of the state to get in there and arrest them? There is room for personal use. There's room for personal responsibility. There's room for people to be using these things as legitimate medicines. And also recreation is a totally legitimate use, I think. I think that sometimes gets overlooked when we're talking about these things. But there's nothing wrong with enjoying yourself. That we have the kind of these bizarre puritanical roots of our culture that says, oh, well, if you're having fun, you must be doing something bad or doing something wrong, and you need to be punished for that. It's really time for the drug war itself just to come to a complete stop nationwide. That's not happening yet, but I hope that Oregon can be an example of how to go about doing it. So I hope that we do it right. Like you mentioned in Being Human, that a big emphasis of my work is that we are all responsible for ourselves, and that, we're responsible for our own authenticity. We're responsible for our own happiness. We're responsible for our own well-being, and that large themes within our society are always projecting that off onto somebody else. Like it's the state's responsibility, or these people are to blame, or there's a strong narrative of victimhood that runs in our culture, in our society. And there's also a strong transcendental yearning within religious and spiritual communities, particularly, Christianity in and of itself is about the transcendent divine power that saves you, and that in a sense absolves you of responsibility to some degree. Whereas I always want to push people to, no, it's up to you to be yourself. It's up to you to be responsible for yourself, and that you have created your own prison. So you're the one who's responsible for dismantling that. And then you're the one who's responsible for your behavior in enacting yourself and in enacting your will. Personal responsibility is a huge part of the message that I like to put out there. And I think that, we don't have enough of that. We look to other people, political movements, ideologies, religions, we always are displacing responsibility. And so it's about finding your own inner responsibility. And then also in really learning that you are not responsible for other people as well. Now, that's not to say that I think society should be free for all competition and that every person for themselves, but that ultimately everyone is responsible for him or herself. And if somebody wants to be a drug addict, that's their responsibility. And if somebody wants to use these tools to self-liberate, that's their responsibility as well. Somebody was getting after me a few weeks ago on Facebook. There's lots of trolls on Facebook. And this person really radically misinterpreted me in the sense that in writing about ideas of liberation, personal liberation, I talk about the freedom to be yourself. I made this post on Facebook and this person said, well, why do you support slavery? And my response was, what the hell do you mean I support slavery? And his interpretation was, if you support any form of government, you support slavery. And he said, I thought you were all about freedom, but really you're just interested in enslaving people into political systems. And it is just such a radical misreading of what I'm talking about, that I'm not talking about political freedom. I mean, sometimes we are. Like, I'm talking about drug decriminalization in Oregon. Yeah, that's a political issue. making psychedelic healthcare available to people. Yeah, that has aspects of a political issue. But the reality is that human beings are social animals. So we all live in societies. There are no anarchistic societies that exist anywhere on the planet. And I don't think that there ever have been. You know, there are societies certainly that have totalitarian states, there are democratic states, there are capitalist democratic states, there are socialist democratic states, there are communist states, there are tribal societies, there are small scale societies, there are theocratic governments. So there's all different kinds of ways that people in society interact with each other. But what is common to all of them is that there is some form of society. There is some form of authority through which resource use is determined and distributed, and through which laws and whatnot are created. And the point of liberation is not necessarily to be free of all political and social structures, because I think we need at least a minimum of political and social structures. Society is a game, and any game has to have rules of some kind, must have some kind of construct in order for society to function. And so I don't see government as inherently evil in any way. It's just part of the reality that we live with. In the same way that, like somebody could say, well, look, I want to be totally free and totally liberated, so I don't ever want to have to eat food again. That's like, but your body needs food. Why are you making that an issue? And some people do that. There's these people that go by the name the breatharians, that they say, oh, you can get everything you need from your breath and from sunlight. And those people end up starving themselves to death because, no, you actually do need food and water and things like that. So there's some degree of this idea of liberation from oppressive governments. Yeah, that's all well and good, but on the other hand, we also all live in a society and we need some kind of structure in order for society to function. So there is a matter of just working with what you have to some degree. And then also working to improve that system. That I'm certainly not completely complacent about the US political structure and system. But I also don't think that we need anarchy in order to be free. And that freedom is about internal freedom, is what I'm talking about. Of not being run by your unconscious ego, not being run by your projections, not being run by your belief system, not being run by your attachment to your illusions, clearing those out. And then you get to be free to be yourself no matter where you are and no matter what kind of society you live in. Now, if you happen to live in a very repressive society, you will not be greeted very well in that context. And, you might get killed. But if you're really choosing to live in freedom, then maybe that's something that you would choose for yourself. I think in the United States, we have a lot more flexibility, particularly for white people. I think it's a lot easier for them to say, hey, I'm just going to be myself than it is if you're a minority. I think it's easier for men than it is for women, just based on the structures of our society. So there's lots of room for improvement there. But that's what the responsibility is that each and every one of us is responsible for being ourselves. No one else is responsible for me being me. No one else is responsible for you being you. That's your responsibility and your responsibility alone. And that if you can embody that within yourself, then you are effectively free. You are free to be yourself. And it's not about the political structures. And it's not about the political system. And it's certainly not about what political party you belong to or what political ideology you attach yourself to. A funny response that came to mind when this guy was posting all this stuff on Facebook, that is just like, God, this person really is a troll and really taking the conversation off course here. What came to mind was the Big Lebowski. So in the Big Lebowski, we've got these anarchists, right? And it's like, so we believe in nothing, Lebowski, nothing. And he's like, fuck, that must be exhausting. And then later, when the Big Lebowski is talking to Walter about it, then Walter keeps calling these people Nazis. And he's like, Walter, they're not Nazis. They're nihilists, man. They believe in nothing. And then Walter says something like, Well, say what you want about the tenets of National Socialism. At least it's an ethos. You know, even if fascist dictatorships, even if that's not good for society, at least in his mind, at least it's better than anarchy, because anarchy is just everyone against everybody else, and there is no social system at all. So say what you will about the tenets of National Socialism. At least it's an ethos, dude. So that's kind of my response to this guy saying, well, you support slavery. I'm like, well, it's not my definition of slavery. My definition of slavery is ownership of human persons against their will, forced to work without pay and without being able to determine the course of their own lives. For me, that would be a definition of slavery, but not existing in a society that has a government is some form of slavery. It's the compensation we make for living in a society that has a healthcare system, that has an educational system, that has a transportation system, that has a system of government to create laws that hopefully can serve the people. We live in a democratic society, so we have the ability to shape the laws themselves. Whereas if you live in a fascist dictatorship, well, then you don't have any opportunity for that. So certainly you have less freedom. And we don't have infinite freedom in the United States, but still, at the individual level, we all, no matter where you are, we all have the freedom to discover our true nature and then to live and be that. Because that's the inherent ability of a human being. It doesn't matter what society you live in, what color your skin is, how you grew up, that everyone has that ability, and therefore everybody has that responsibility. Because I'm not promoting a social free-for-all. For me, it's all grounded in the non-dual experience. And the non-dual experience is the recognition that you are everyone and everything, not at the personal individual level, but at the absolute level. And therefore, other people are other versions of yourself. And if you have love and compassion for yourself, which is generated through the non-dual experience, then you extend that to others. So it's not a matter of social competition. It actually becomes a matter of social cooperation and giving and affording the same freedoms you have given yourself to others and the same love and compassion you have given to yourself to others. My worldview is very much grounded in universal human equality and compassion. And it's, you know, like I'm not a libertarian in that sense, that it's just, oh yeah, all government regulation is bad, and so we should all just be able to do whatever we want. That I don't think that that serves either the individual or society, and certainly does not serve the environment. You know, individuals and corporations have not been shown to have a lot of empathy and compassion for the environment or for the long-term health of the planet, because at that level, people are just operating from self-interest and greed, and that's not grounded in universal compassion and universal recognition of the fundamental equality of the self between all aspects and embodiments of the self.